Hello students, so today in this particular experiment, right, so we will starting with today experiment number 5, that is to design and configure the simulation for dynamic routing based RIP protocol, right. So if you see, we have also already discussed about this particular static routing protocol in our previous experiment, right. So in this from today we will start with our dynamic routing protocols, right. So if you go in on a NDL course page, right, so network design lab course page, right, so you will find out here on tab number 4, that is experiment number 5, right, that is to design and configure dynamic routing based RIP protocol, right. So if you see the prerequisite which will be required for complete this particular RIP based routing protocol configuration on Cisco packet tracer, right. So first of all, the basic knowledge about the networking commands, right, you must know, because we need to configure this particular RIP on the Cisco packet tracer via command line interface, right. So you must understand what are the different commands which will be used for that configuration part, right. So then IP address classes also you must know, right, because we need to configure different routers with the different IP range, right. And then exposure to this Cisco packet tracer tool also you must know, because you know already we need to use a different internet networking devices and different networking components within this particular Cisco packet tracer, right. And then we need to attach with some transmission medium, right. Then the routing configuration through this particular command line interface for RIP also you must know. So how to configure that particular router, right, what are the different commands for that, right. So all these things you must know prior to this particular experiment, right. Then if you see the problem statement for in this particular experiment, right, so we already discussed about the static routing protocol, right. So whatever the disadvantage of static routing protocol, that means if you see in static routing protocol, right, so in static routing protocol, every time that administrator needs to update the routing table information, right. So whatever the route you are going to add into that particular router, right, that is not automatically get updated, right. So administrator needs to do all that things, right. But if your network is a small network, right, then it will be easy to add a route into that particular router's configuration or into that particular routing table, right. But if your network is very large, right, then there is no any we cannot remember all these configuration and all that things, right, in order to update in routing table, right. And so for that purpose, this particular static routing will not be helpful for any large network, right. So it can be used for 2 to 3 internet networking devices if you are using for your kind of the network, right. And at the small size of the network you can use this particular static routing, right. So this is one of the disadvantage of static routing, right. So to overcome that, we are introducing here the dynamic routing protocol, right. So there are a number of dynamic routing protocol are there. For example, RIP is there, then the EIGRP is there, and then OSPF is there, right. So these are nothing but the dynamic routing protocol, right, so which automatically get updated your routing table information, right. And there will be no need to remember all the configuration and all that part, right. So in this way you must understand in this particular experiment that what is the disadvantage of the existing static routing protocol, right, and what are the advantages of that particular dynamic routing protocol, right. So that you must know in this particular experiment, right. And again you must understand how to configure this particular RIP routing configuration into that particular router, right. And also we will see here in this particular experiment how to do that with the help of some command line interface CLI, and also via GUI how to see all these things, right, or how to add this particular RIP into the network topologies, right. And if you see in here in this particular network topology, right, so I have used here the 3 routers over here, the router 1, router 2 and router 3, right. And these 2 routers will be having some serial communication in between with having some clock serial communication, right. And these 2 routers are connected to different 2 switches, and each switch having some 2 end devices which are connected, that is PC0 and PC1 for this switch and PC2 and PC3 for this particular switch, right. And if you see in this particular topology itself, right, so here also the static routing can be possible because it is a small kind of the network, right. But but we will see what are the disadvantage, right? So every time what you need to do is, for example, if you see for this particular router, right, so this particular router is having this 10.0.0.1 series and 192.168 series, right? But it not be aware of this particular third network, that is 20.0.0.1, because this particular router is having this particular number of series, right? So what you need to do is, if you wanted to send a packet from this particular PC0 to PC2, right, it will not send, right, unless and until you can you need to add here that particular 20 series in the routing table of this particular router, right? Then and then only this particular router will be able to know that that's 20 series network is also there, right? And it can be send a traffic to that particular network, and then only the ping will be you are getting the ping successfully, right? So in this way you can add routers routing information in the routing table, right, statically, manually, right? So overcome this problem, right, so we are going to use this particular RIP dynamic routing protocol, right? So in that what we are going to do is, if you see in this particular routers, is having two interfaces, that is, first one is your fast Ethernet here, and this is nothing but your serial communication, right? So what we are going to do is, we are going to configure this particular all three routers with their interfaces, right, so in which they are connected with, right? For example, this first router I am going to configure with RIP with this particular 10 series and this 192 series, right? This particular second router I am going to configure with RIP 192, 150 and this particular 220 series, right? And the third router I am going to configure with RIP 150 series, right? So likewise, each and every routers now know what are the interfaces they have, and then this particular RIP will take a role, and it will be automatically get updated its routing table information, right, with its neighboring whatever the network you have, right? And accordingly it will be update their routing table information, right? And then if you ping from this particular PC0 to PC2 and all that things, right, so you will get the ping over there, right? So we will see in the in detail in the lab manual also, right, so how this particular experiment can be carried out, and we will also see some hands-on for in a Cisco packet tracer, right? So let us move towards the lab manual for this particular experiment. Okay. Okay, so if you see in this particular experiment, that is a dynamic routing based RIP protocol, so it is nothing but your distance vector IGP routing protocol is there, right? So it will be, we can be routing in between within the same autonomous system here, right? So there are some certain features if you wanted to listing out, right? So it will support maximum 15 hops in their path, right? It will be uses some count metrics to calculate the base path from the source and the destination, right? And it will take time as a 30-second to update all the routing table information if any network changes will be happened, right? And if you talk about the administrative distance, right, so it will be have the RIP protocol which is having this 120, right? So each and every protocol is having some different administrative distance, right? So in case of RIP protocol it will be having 120, right? And there will be two versions for RIP version 1 and RIP version 2, right? So you will find it out in this lab manual, the more information regarding this, right? So we are going to able to perform the RIP version 1 over here, right? So if you see in this particular topology, right, so the topology I have already explained to you, right, what I am going to drag and drop each components and how I am going to configure all these things, right? So if you see I have given already one table over here, right? So it will be state you the different internet networking devices, their interfaces and the IP addresses which I am going to allocate to that particular interface, right? For example, if you see router 1, right, so for router 1 I am going to, for fast Ethernet 0/0, I am giving this 10.0.0.1 as the IP address, right? So you will find it out here, right? So for serial communication S1 192.168.1.0 1.1, sorry, so it will be happening having here, right? So likewise I have listed here for each and every internet networking devices, their interface and their IP addresses over here, right? So from here itself also you are going to create this particular topology, right? Or from the topology also you are going to add such a IP address and all that things, right? Then we need to configure all these internet networking devices, right? So I will start start with the router 1, right? So for router 1 I am going to configure this IP address to this particular fast ethernet, and this IP address for this particular serial communication, right? So how to do that? So for that you need to just click on this particular router, go to CLI and just type their en command, right? So routers en, so it will be enable that particular router, right? Then you need to fire a command config space t, right? So that is nothing but the configuration terminal of that particular router, right? And after that you need to whatever the interface you need to configure, you need to just type that is interface fs0/1, then the IP address of that particular interface, and the accordingly the subnet mask for that particular IP address, right? And the no shut is for the enabling that particular interface, right? So same way you need to again configure the serial communication, right? That is s1/0. Then you need to give the IP address to that particular serial communication. The clock rate we are giving the 64,000, and again the no shut, right? And if you see about this particular PC's configuration, right? So for PC 0 I am going to give IP address as the 10.0.0.2, and here I am going to use this particular router's IP address as my default gateway, right? The same thing will be for the PC1. Router's IP address, that is 10.0.0.1, is for the default gateway for this particular PC1, right? Likewise for PC2 also, the 20.0.0.1 will be the default gateway, and for PC3 also this will be your default gateway, right? Likewise I'm going to again configure this. If you are going to desktop, I'm giving the same thing, right? Then I will move towards this particular router 2, right? So router 2 having the 3 connection. If you go and if you check for this particular topology, right? So router 2 having this particular fast ethernet, this serial communication, and again this particular fast ethernet, right? So these 3 interfaces you need to configure on the router 2, right? And for the router 3 I am having only one interface, that is this particular fast 0/0 ethernet port, right? So for third I am going to configure only the one port, right? So I will same way I have configured. For example, for router 2, if you see interface fs0/0 I am giving this IP address. For interface fs0/1 I am giving this IP address, and for serial communication I am giving this particular IP address, right? And for R3 I am having only one interface, so I am giving this particular IP address to over there, right? Then I am going to configure the RIP routing, right? So here we are configuring the RIP dynamically, dynamic routing protocol, right? So how to do that, right? So for that you need to go to that particular router's configuration page again, go to CLI to that particular router, right? Enable that router, go to config terminal for that particular router by using command config space t, and then you need to fire a command router space RIP, because you need to configure that particular router with this particular RIP dynamic routing protocol, right? Then here if you see I am going to configure this. If you see here, config dash router will come after this particular command, right? That means you are under the configuration of that particular router through terminal, right? Then you need to fire a command network space whatever the interfaces you are connected with that particular router, right? So if you see here I am giving here the two network, right? 10 dot series network and the 192 series network, right? And if you go and check that particular topology, right? So if you see here, this particular router 1 is having two interfaces, 10 dot series and 192 series, right? So I am giving here the starting IP address of that particular series, right? So if you see here the 10.0.0.0 I am giving, and again the 192 that 160.1.0 I am giving, right? The same way for the router 2 I am having the three interfaces, so all the three interfaces starting address I am giving as a network space, all this thing, right? And for the router 3 also I am having only one interface, so starting IP address for that particular network I am giving as 150.150.150.0 here, right? So after that you can also check whatever you have configured whether it will be configured correctly or not, right? So on whatever the routers, if you fire a command show space IP space root, right? So you will get some kind of the these things, right? So if you check here it will be give you as a capital R, right? That is 10.0.0.0 this particular network you are going to connect via this particular 192.168 series, right? Which is having nothing but the serial communication, right? And if this particular R is stand for this RIP. If you see here the codes for each and everything, right? So R is nothing but for RIP. That means you have successfully configured this particular router for RIP routing protocol, right? So you can check for each and every router with the same thing, show IP space route, right? Again, you can show with the help of some show space IP space using protocol. So it will be gives you the all the routing for the networks, right? It will also showing whatever the routing protocol you are going to use on that particular router. So it will be showing you the RIP, right? And from every 30 seconds that will be update, the routing table will be updated over there, right? And here the some networks or whatever we have configured, that will it will be showing you here, right? And obviously the administrative distance is nothing but your 120 for RIP, right? It will be also showing the default will be your 120 distances, right? So after this successfully configuration of this particular router 1, router 2 and router 3, this router space RIP, and you are going to ping from any kind of this system to any kind of the system, then it will be, you will get the successfully ping over here, right? Because we have configured each and every router here as a dynamic routing protocol, right? So it will be update automatically its routing table with its neighboring routers, right? So in this way this particular RIP can be configured, right? So we will see in the Cisco packet tracer, right, how it can be done, right? So let's move towards the Cisco packet tracer. Okay, so if you see in a Cisco packet tracer, right, whatever we have whatever we have a logical topology over here, right? So we have already discussed the configuration, right? So I have just shown you the each and every components configuration over here, right? So if I am just double clicking on this particular PC number 1, right? So just going to the IP configuration of it, and if you see here I am giving the IP address as 10.0.0.2, right? And if you see the default gateway for this particular PC 0, right, this is nothing but my this particular interface IP, that is 10.0.0.1, right? So in this way we will have the same configuration for each and every PCs, right? So if you see here also I am giving here the 10.0.0.3 as IP, and the default gateway is nothing but for this particular router's IP address, right? That is 10.0.0.1, right? The same thing will be happen for this particular other kind of other part of the network as well, right? So for this PC I am having this router's IP address as the default gateway, and for this PC also I am having this particular router's IP address as my default gateway, right? Then if you see the configuration of this particular routers, right, so whichever we have, so if we just double click on that particular routers configuration part, right, so whenever you go with this particular interfaces, right, so for fast Ethernet I am having this 10.0.0.1 as my IP addresses, right? So if you see here also I am having the same IP address and the corresponding class A subnet mask for that particular IP, right? And if you go with the serial communication, that is serial 2/0, I am having this particular 1.1 as IP and correspond to the class C net mask over here with the clock rate of 64,000, right? So this is about this particular router, right? And if I have already configured this particular router as a RIP, right? And if you wanted to check whether it can be allocated or if you wanted to configure this via GUI, right, so it is also possible. So you just go with the routing tab, right? So here you will find the RIP, right? So here I have configured it. You need to provide here just the network IP, whatever you wanted to configure as a RIP, right? So I am given here the 10.0.0.0, that is nothing but the starting IP of this particular interface, and the 1.0, that is nothing but the starting IP address of this particular interface, right? And I have just added here, so it will be appear here in this particular list, right? So this is a router first router 1 whatever I have used for that particular I have configured as a RIP routing, dynamic routing protocol over here, right? So likewise I am also configured this particular 2 routers, right? So I will show you this 2 router also, right? So just go with the router number 2. So I will just click on this particular fast Ethernet. What is the IP address? We will just check. This is 20.0.0.1 for 0/0, right? For 1/0 I am having this 150.150.150. something IP addresses, and for this particular serial communication also I am having this particular 192.168.1.2 as in my IP addresses, right? And is also having my clock rate, right? So if you see the RIP for this particular router number 2, right, so if you see here I have the 3 interfaces, right, and for 3 interfaces I am having the 3 starting IP for that particular network. I have configured as a RIP IP addresses, right. So if you see here, the starting IP is nothing but 20.0.0.0, 150.150.0.0, and again 192.160.1.0, right. So for this particular routing also I have configured as RIP routing, and for the third one also I have, if you see the fast 0/0, I am having some 150, 150, 152, right, and for the RIP, if you see, I am having the starting IP of this particular network, that is 150.150.0.0, right. So in this way I have configured each and every internet networking component in networking devices with this particular logical topology, right, and I have configured here all the 3 routers with the RIP routing, right, and I have shown you the CLI as well as the through GUI how to configure all these things, right. And if you go and if you just check with the connectivity in between these 2 devices, right, whether these 2 kind of the network can be ping is possible or not, right. So the ping will be possible and vice versa, so we have checked, so it will also possible in this particular thing, right. So this is nothing but for with respect to your RIP, right. So we have getting the successful replies, right. So in this way we have successful connection in between this particular RIP routing protocol that will be dynamically updates all the routing information with that particular router, right. So it will be dynamically update the routing information of this particular router because we have used the RIP routing protocol, right. So this is I think this I hope you will got this particular idea, right, and you know what is the disadvantage of static routing and what is the advantage of the dynamic routing, right. So this is all about the RIP routing protocol. Okay, so thank you for joining. We will stop today.